Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's NRAS Live, all about nutrition and diet when managing rheumatoid arthritis. I hope you're all well tonight and enjoying this heat. We don't get too much of it very often, but maybe it's just a little bit too hot tonight. So I'm delighted to be joined by my friend and colleague, Dr. Elena Nikiphorou, and two of our wonderful volunteers, Ailsa and Jyoti. And I'm just going to ask everybody to quickly introduce themselves, and then I'll just do a little intro, and then we'll get started with Elena's presentation. So, Elena, you're first on my screen. Would you like to just introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Elsa. Thank you to NRAS for having me in your company tonight. So I'm a rheumatologist at King's College Hospital in London.
Thank you. Ailsa.
Hi, I'm an NRAS volunteer. I've been volunteering with NRAS since for about 4+ years. I live with rheumatoid arthritis. I've had rheumatoid arthritis for just over about 14 years now.
Thank you. And Jyoti.
Hi, I'm again a NRAS patient volunteer, and I have had rheumatoid arthritis for 25 years now. I have worked with Ailsa on and off on various projects for about 16 years, I think now. So and that's me.
Great, thank you. Well, hopefully you all know me. I'm NRAS's founder and national patient champion, and it's great to welcome everybody tonight. So just to give you a little intro, Elena and I worked together as joint conveners of the EULAR task force, which published the EULAR recommendations for the implementation of self-management strategies in inflammatory arthritis in 2021. EULAR is the European Alliance of Associations for Rheumatology and includes all the European patient organizations like NRAS. One of the 9 recommendations stated that lifestyle advice based on evidence should be given to better manage common comorbidity, and patients should be guided and encouraged by their healthcare team to adopt healthy behaviors. That, of course, includes eating a healthy and balanced diet to maximize your general and RA health outcomes. We know there's a huge amount of interest in diet and nutrition, and this is one area that we who live with this disease do have some control over. The NICE RA guideline in the UK, which like the EULAR recommendations is all evidence-based, states that you should inform adults with RA who wish to experiment with their diet that there is no strong evidence that their arthritis will benefit. However, they could be encouraged to follow the principles of a Mediterranean diet: more bread, fruit, vegetables, and fish, less meat, and replace butter and cheese with products based on vegetable and plant oils. However, I suspect that in most outpatient follow-up consults, diet and nutrition doesn't feature very large unless specifically raised by the patient. And we at NRAS are well aware just how much misinformation there is out there in regard to diet and its impact on RA. And I certainly have had the experience, and I'm sure Jyoti and Ailsa will have had as well, where someone will say something like, "Oh, you shouldn't eat tomatoes," or some other food which is based on a food intolerance that they might have, but which cannot be generalized advice for an entire patient population. One thing that is important to inform people watching tonight before we get started is that there is a great deal of interest and research that is now being done relating to the microbiome and its importance in autoimmune diseases. And just 2 weeks ago at the EULAR Congress in Vienna, which Elena and I were both at, there were a number of scientific sessions dedicated to this subject. And for anybody who hasn't heard that term before, the microbiome is the collection of all microbes such as bacteria, fungi, viruses, and their genes that naturally live on our bodies and inside our bodies. So, Elena, we're looking forward to your talk, after which we'll explore with Jyoti and Ailsa how they manage their diet in relation to their RA. And I know they both have incredibly busy lives, so it'll be interesting to hear from them. And then we'll go on to ask the questions that have been submitted in advance of this live event tonight. So over to you, Elena.
Thank you very much once again, NRAS, and Ailsa, of course, my good friend and colleague. It's really important to be discussing this topic. I'm hoping that my slides will appear on the screen in a moment, Ailsa, so I can talk through them. Fantastic. Okay, so there you go. So if we just scroll on to the second, third slide. Okay, so how can healthy eating benefit people living with rheumatic diseases, and more specifically, people living with rheumatoid arthritis? I have to say that most of the evidence comes from studies in rheumatoid arthritis, one of the commonest types of inflammatory arthritis. So a lot of what I will be saying to you tonight is based on those studies. So nutrition, diet is an external environmental factor that can help us reduce inflammation in the body through the intake of more anti-inflammatory foods and less pro-inflammatory foods. It can help us to balance our weight through balancing the intake versus the body's needs in terms of the food that we eat and the energy that we take in. And it can also have an impact on reducing the risk of comorbidities such as osteoporosis, diabetes, high blood pressure, just to name a few. And there's a lot of science, a lot of evidence, many studies to date that have shown that consuming a more healthy diet, having a better nutrition, can lead to less pain, less fatigue, less flares of disease, among other symptoms. Next. So keeping our gut healthy is absolutely crucial. And Ailsa, you've already mentioned the gut microbiome. There's been a lot of research on this already. It deserves a whole session on its own, the gut microbiome. So I will only give you very top-line messages. And what I can tell you is that our gastrointestinal tract is colonized by a broad range of microbes, fungi, bacteria, viruses. There's trillions of these microorganisms. It's like a little factory. And these microbiota interact with the host's immune responses, establishing a very bidirectional relationship, a bit of a crosstalk between the two. And the way we eat influences this gut microbiome. So, for example, if you eat more fiber, this will determine what gut microbiota will be, what the gut microbiome will be composed of, and consequently will determine immunity and expression of disease. It's worth noting that about 70% of immune cells, about 80% of antibodies are produced in the digestive tract. So it's a very important organ in the system implicated in health and disease. Next slide. And this is where the role of prebiotics and probiotics come into the picture. I just wonder whether one of the NRAS people in the background can remove this there's a little note that I keep seeing on the slides. I don't know where it's coming from. But if there's anything, maybe reload the slides. Ailsa, can you see that as well?
Sorry, no, I couldn't. What are you referring to?
Okay, I will ignore it. It's just a label that keeps coming up in every slide. But if you can't see it, then I'm happy.
I can't see it. No.
Okay. Prebiotics are those fibers that are not digestible by our body, and thus they help our gut microbiome grow and stay healthy. And these are examples, as you can see on the screen, of prebiotic foods such as asparagus, artichokes, bananas, beans, peas, and so on. All very healthy in terms of keeping a healthy gut microbiome. And the probiotics are those live bacteria that are found in foods and supplements. And examples include kefir, which is sour milk, sauerkraut, which is fermented cabbage, and tempeh, for example, fermented soybeans. And it is generally recommended that we consume a few portions of both pre and probiotics on a daily basis to maintain a healthy gut. Next. So this is the first take-home message I'm going to give you. This is very, very top line, as I said, just giving you some very key messages out there. There is evidence to suggest that nutrition plays an important role in inflammation and in immune responses. Next. But does the type of diet we choose actually matter? Next slide. So the modern diet practiced in many Western societies has been characterized by some as being the worst enemy of chronic inflammatory autoimmune conditions. And this is because it's characterized, now if you go back please, before we go into the fatty acids. So it's characterized by a high intake of sugar, salt, the wrong types of fats, refined carbohydrates, processed foods, and these all make this diet highly inflammatory. Next slide. So I talked about the wrong types of fats, and I think it's worth taking a little bit of time to talk about the omega-3 and the omega-6, which have attracted a lot of attention in the literature of nutrition and rheumatic diseases. Let me try and explain this. Oils are made up of fatty acids. It's part of the chemistry of the oil. I don't have my pointer, it doesn't work on the screen, but fatty acid is essentially a chain of carbons, as you can see on this slide here, with what we call double bonds, so double bonds, so the straight lines that you can see here for those with a biochemistry background. And depending on the position of this double bond, you have either an omega-3 if it's at the third carbon, which is a bottom fatty acid that you can see here from what we call the omega end, or if it's at the sixth carbon, then you get an omega-6. What is particularly interesting is that a subtle change in the position of this double bond determines how the fatty acid behaves in the body. So omega-3 are more anti-inflammatory, omega-6 are more pro-inflammatory. But what really matters is to get the ratio between these two right in the body. Next slide. So these are sources of omega-3 on the left-hand side. So alpha-linolenic acid is a plant-based source of omega-3. You can see different types of oils there that give you omega-3. In fact, olive oil has a bit of everything, omega-3, omega-6, but it's very rich in omega-9, which is a monounsaturated fatty acid, MUFA, which is what gives olive its unique properties, its unique antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. And EPA and DHA, which you can see at the bottom there, is the long-chain versions of fatty acids. We get them from fish sources such as sardines, mackerel, and salmon. On the right-hand side, you see sources of omega-6, the plant-based sources at the top, linolenic acid, and the animal-based sources at the bottom with arachidonic acid. Now, a fact worth noting is that in order for the omega-3 to exert those anti-inflammatory properties, which is what I'm trying to show in that middle part of the slide there, is that they have to be converted from the short chain form to the long chain form. But that conversion in the human body is not very efficient because there is competition in that enzyme that converts from short to long chains between the omega-3 and the omega-6. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that you can get to those anti-inflammatory, antioxidant properties much quicker. In other words, those long-chain fatty acids, which give you those properties much quicker if you consume them directly from, for example, fish-based sources, which contain a lot of this. So if you can't consume fish, you will hear often dietitians say to include fish in your diet, which will give you these good long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. Next slide. And there's a lot of evidence. This is one of the studies by Proudman published in one of the highest impact factor rheumatology journals, the Annals of Rheumatic Disease, which showed that in patients with RA, rheumatoid arthritis of less than 12 months duration, who had not taken disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drug yet, supplementation with high-dose fish oil, the long-chain form of the omega-3, the EPA and the DHA, resulted in beneficial effects both in achieving remission, low disease activity, and better outcomes overall compared to those who are on much lower doses of omega-3. Next slide. So this is a second take-home message. We've got 5 in total in this short version of the presentation. Omega-3 supplementation of at least 2 grams per day is considered useful and could reduce inflammation and improve symptoms in inflammatory joint disease. And this is a sort of recommendation that has made it into national guidelines, such as the French National Recommendations on Nutrition and Rheumatic Diseases. Next slide. Salt is another important constituent of the Western diet, but we know through various mechanisms, also at cellular level, that it increases inflammation through an increase in those pro-inflammatory cells and those inflammatory molecules that we know are implicated in many rheumatic diseases, including rheumatoid arthritis. Next slide. And this is where this beautiful world of herbs and spices becomes very relevant. They not only offer a good alternative to salt, but they also enhance the taste of food, the color of the food, and the scent of food. So it's a really good alternative to those who are trying to reduce their salt intake. And this is why we're increasingly seeing various different types of herbs and spices making it into specific supplements in health shop displays. Next slide. Just going to show you very quickly the kind of evidence that we have in these herbs and spices. Here is a study looking at cinnamon in patients with rheumatoid arthritis, a very small sample, as you can see there, 36 women, a randomized double-blind study, so a clinical trial of 8 weeks duration, so very short duration. These studies are often of very short duration. It's one of the limitations of very small sample sizes in terms of the numbers of people participating, and it essentially showed that taking 2 grams of cinnamon in capsule form per day compared to placebo, resulting in beneficial effects in terms of reducing disease activity scores, so the disease activity level in patients with RA, improving tender joint and swollen joint counts at the 8-week time point. Next slide. There's another study as an example from only last year that looked at curcumin, which is the active ingredient of turmeric. And it specifically tried to answer the question, could curcumin maintain remission in patients with RA while tapering the conventional disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs? And to cut a long story short, you can see the message there in red at the bottom. It showed that curcumin did not impact that flare-free survival, meaning it didn't have an impact on whether people flared or not in those patients with RA during that tapering phase, so withdrawing the conventional DMARDs, despite having achieved good levels in the blood. Next slide. Sugar is another important constituent of the Western diet, and on the next slide, I'm going to show you how it works. So this is a very big study from colleagues in Boston in the US, looking at the consumption of high fructose corn syrup sweetened soft drinks, so very sugary drinks, and the development of rheumatoid arthritis in adult women. And it showed that there was an association there, very big patient numbers, as you can see there. Again, it's difficult without being able to use my cursor, but if you follow what I say, I will try and show you how sugar results in inflammation in the body. It's not so much the direct effects of sugar, it's what sugar does to the system overall. So if you eat, for example, a bar of milk chocolate, a Cadbury's bar, a high glycemic load meal, you might have heard of the high GI index foods, so high load of sugar. What will happen is that your sugar level, that's a red line, if you follow the red line on the graph, the sugar level will very rapidly increase. That will stimulate the secretion of insulin in order to try and tell the body, bring down the sugar level, which is a downward slope that you can see on the graph, the red downward slope. That rapid decrease in sugar level, though, will stimulate the secretion of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. So essentially, consuming high glucose content foods, high GI types of foods, will result in a very stressful environment in the body. Whereas if you were to consume what we call the low glycemic load meals, low GI foods, the rise, which is the green line that you can see on the bar, the rise in the blood sugar level is more steady, and the decrease is also more steady, resulting in less inflammation. Next slide. So these are examples of low GI foods, just to give you an idea. One point to make on that second bullet point there about pasta al dente, you will see I specifically said al dente, because if you overcook the pasta, you will change their GI index from low to high. So you will make them high GI foods as opposed to low GI foods when they're eaten in their al dente, less, so non-overcooked version. So the way we cook our food also matters. And this is also relevant, for example, in the way we use and cook with oil. Next slide. These are examples of high GI foods, and you can see they include white bread, all sorts of types of white potatoes, the way we cook them, white rice, most breakfast cereals, which we're all guilty of giving. I am guilty of giving lots of cereal to my children, but they are examples of high GI foods. Melon, watermelon can have that effect on the sugar level that I've shown you on the previous graph. So these are the foods that it's worth paying more attention to, and perhaps consuming less of compared to those foods which are more which are low GI. Next slide. So take-home message 3 is limit salt and sugar intake. There is benefit in doing so, in reducing inflammation, and use more herbs and spices. Next slide. So red is what we should be avoiding. This is a very pro-inflammatory diet. We should be shifting more towards the green table of what we can see here. So consuming a diet that's low in added sugar, low in glycemic index, high in fiber to keep a healthy gut microbiome, low in saturated and high in monounsaturated fat, high in omega-3 fatty acids, high in phytochemicals, phytonutrients, which are plant chemicals, whole foods, and foods that are naturally rich in vitamins and minerals. Next slide. Is there such a diet? Yes, there is. We've heard from Ailsa already about the Mediterranean diet. This is the recommended diet also in the national recommendations in France that I mentioned earlier on nutrition and rheumatic diseases. It has the most evidence in terms of being an anti-inflammatory diet. Ailsa described this diet earlier in her introduction. So it's essentially less red meat consumption, more fish, more fiber, more fresh fruit and vegetables, more fresh produce, even a glass of red wine. I mentioned earlier phytonutrients in my previous slide. So these plant chemicals on the skin of red grapes, you find something called resveratrol, which is one of these plant chemicals that are highly antioxidant and anti-inflammatory. And this is what gives red wine its anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. Next slide. And evidence suggests that if you actually combine the Mediterranean diet with a bit of exercise as part of the Mediterranean sort of lifestyle, then there are added effects, so synergistic effects. So it's worth including both a good exercise regime in your daily routine, Mediterranean diet. There's benefits demonstrated in this study, both in terms of physical functioning, but also mental components and overall patient well-being. This is a study in patients with rheumatoid arthritis. Next slide. So take-home message 4, we're nearly there. The Mediterranean diet or lifestyle represents a good, balanced approach to follow. Next slide. Inflammation and the risk of comorbidities should not be forgotten. Inflammation is not just central to the rheumatic disease, to the rheumatoid arthritis in this case, but it's also central in the pathogenesis and the development of other conditions, what we refer to as comorbidities, alongside the rheumatoid, whether it's heart disease, whether it's a neurological disease, bone disease, liver disease, and so on. Next slide. And there are lots of ways whereby through good nutrition and by good nutrition, I mean what you see on the slide here. We've already talked about a lot of these food components, so the plant-based sort of chemicals, the good fatty acids, the omega-3, monounsaturated fatty acids through, for example, the virgin olive oil consumption, oily fish, and so on. These are all important in improving heart disease, so cardiovascular risk in our patients. Next slide. And this is another slide showing the impact of nutrition on bone, so osteoporosis and osteopenia, and how we could work on preventing these problems from developing. And it's not just about calcium and vitamin D, as you can see on this slide. It's about many other important nutrients, minerals, such as magnesium, vitamin C, vitamin K, and potassium that you can get from all these sources, food sources that you can see here. Next slide. So this is the last but not least take-home message. Many comorbidities can benefit from nutritional interventions. So we shouldn't think just of the rheumatoid arthritis, but we should think of all other coexisting conditions for more comprehensive and holistic management of our patients. Next slide. All this and so much more. I think we do stop there. If you go one more slide, that was the end. So thank you very much for listening. There's a lot more that we could be talking about, Ailsa, as you know, but I'm happy to stop and take any questions.
Thank you very much, Elena. That was a fantastic whistle-stop tour through what we all ought to be doing. So let me, before we start on the questions, let me just come to our volunteers, and I'm going to start with Jyoti. Jyoti, I know you run your own business. You're a busy mum. You know, you've got a very full day. How do you manage your diet and what you eat to maximize your RA health?
I think it's a lot to do with preparation and planning for me, definitely. And just seeing what you're eating, you know, how many portions of fish you've had. I am a vegetarian. I don't eat meat. I eat fish and I eat eggs. So for me, it is how much fish I've had. You know, I don't have fish every day, but every other day, and then I try to have eggs in between. So yeah, it's just planning what you're eating. And you're right, you know, it is very fast. I have to, you know, I have a very short time, although I work from home. It is, you know, a very quick lunch and then dinner. But then I plan the meals for the evening for the children. I try to cook as healthy as I can, no fried food, things like that. And try to keep as much of a balanced diet, make sure there's enough vegetables for everybody, and make sure it's as fresh as possible. And they all eat meat anyway, so obviously I have their chicken or whatever they're going to have that day. So yeah, so I try to balance it. I think it's a lot of getting that right, isn't it? And quite often we're very quick to, oh, actually I'll just get something really, really fast, but that's not always the healthiest way to do it. And so that's what I do mainly. I try to prepare and balance when I do my shopping and when I do my preps.
Okay. And Elena mentioned the benefits of adding exercise into that. So do you, in your busy schedule, get time to do any exercise?
Do you know, I'll be very, very honest with you. I haven't had a chance to do that. I do try to go for walks. I have had, I am in the midst of a flare at the moment, so I have tried to reduce that. Not reduce it like as such, but I haven't been able to do as much as I wanted to do. In the past, I've done a lot of hot yoga, swimming, things like that, and they're very, you know, I go to really gentle yoga classes and swimming, and that really does help because it just helps take the pressure off your joints, I think, in the water. So that's always been very beneficial. But I know Aisha's brilliant at the exercise.
Yes,
So,
she is.
She's fantastic. Yeah. So yeah, I'm sure she'll be able to do it. But yeah, I've only tried the things that I feel that I can do, and then you've got to enjoy it as well. I think that's really important. So find what you enjoy, and for me, it's definitely hot yoga and swimming.
Okay, thank you. So Aisha, let me come to you. I know you also are super busy with a family and run your own business as well. I know nutrition and exercise are a very important part of your life. So how do you manage your diet?
I'm really similar to what Jyoti said. So I'm really big on fiber, protein because I resistance train frequently. But so like for example, yesterday or the day before, I made a big tray bake. So it was broccoli, cauliflower, red onions, sweet carrots, put olive oil on it, put foil on it, put it in the oven for about an hour on a low heat. My kids loved it. They were like, what have you put? Because the beetroot made it sweet. The onion was caramelized. And then we'll have that with the protein sauce. So like they might have it with some chicken. Like Jyoti, I love fish. So I prefer fish over chicken. I do eat red meat, but red meat I try to limit. So and I find that the way we eat, and I follow the aim of 30. We've talked about this before, Ailsa. You and me discussed this, 30 plants a week. So I try to follow the 30 plants. So I've actually got an Excel spreadsheet on my fridge with nuts, seeds, because all of those count as 30 plants a week, fruits, veg, and then we try it. And my children are older. So Alina, my daughter, is almost 18. My son is almost 15. I'll be honest, it's harder to get my feet on board. I'm not sure. I'm really sorry. I'm not sure if it's my laptop. Can you hear me okay? Or
we can hear you now. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not. Yeah.
Carry on. Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah. So I'm very similar to Jyoti. So I always prioritize the vegetables and the greens, and then the protein, and then exercise is a part of my daily life. I'm not sure if you can hear me or if it's the sound.
Yes, no, we can. I sympathise with Jyoti because I'm exactly the same. I struggle with exercise, especially as a lot of the pain I get is in feet and ankles, which does limit what you can do. But I think that one of the things that strikes me is we are all, and I think many of the people watching tonight are very interested in this subject and want to do what they can to maximise their health outcomes. But I'm very conscious that there is an economic crisis going on, that, you know, a lot of people are struggling with, you know, high bills and food costs and so on. And I think it's actually quite challenging to eat as healthily as you might like, when, especially if you're in a neighborhood where there may not be that many shops with fresh fruit and vegetables and all that sort of thing, and you may not have the time or the money to shop around and find things that might be healthier. So Elena, maybe my first question to you is, how easy do you think it is to eat healthily on a low budget, and when you may be working and have very little time to spend cooking from scratch and all of the good things that we know about?
It's a very good question, Elsa. And I'm afraid I think that it's just very, very challenging. You have to make effort. You have to make good effort to achieve this. There are ways. So I'll tell you a little tip that I've also learned, and Jyoti and Ailsa, you might all know it actually, but also for our audience. We were having a discussion recently about organic versus non-organic fruits, for example. I've got little children myself, as you know, Elsa, so they're very expensive to buy. But then I don't know if you know of the trick of the sodium bicarbonate. So soda, using soda to wash your fruit in. So there's a lot sort of going on in the social media as well. There's as always in the social media, but washing your fruit, for example, in sodium bicarbonate. So the baking soda, basically, that we use for baking cakes, is good in removing the insecticides, the pesticides from non-organic foods. So I've started doing that, and you can see that layer forming on top of the water as you wash the fruit, and it's small things. And I've given this as an example, just to show that there are things that it takes effort. Like we've heard from Jyoti that she has to prepare her food in advance because of a young family and work and everything. So I think it's not easy, but it's possible. And what we should focus on is doing more of the good things and less of the bad things, I guess.
Sure.
Within what we can, within our capabilities and financial constraints. So
finding, and presumably you can find these on the net. I know I often download recipes from the internet. Finding recipes that are cooked from scratch, but with inexpensive ingredients, but things like lentils, beans, and using more herbs and spices, as you've talked about, Elena. It is possible, but you do have to work at it, and therefore it takes effort and commitment. But I certainly think I know that when I eat at my most healthy level, I feel better. I can feel the difference. If I'm away at conference or somewhere where I can't get access to the normal fruits and vegetables and things that I have, I don't feel as good. So I think that we did have a question about that. How do you know if you're eating a diet that's actually helping your RA? You will, I believe, feel better if you're eating more healthily. So let's get into the questions, because we've got quite a lot. So first question is from Fiona. Is it safe to take fermented foods like kefir to boost our gut health when medications are technically trying to suppress the immune system?
Okay, I think the short answer to that, and please bear in mind that I'm a rheumatologist with an interest in this, but not a dietitian. But I think the short answer to that is that there is certainly evidence. I've touched on this in my presentation on the potential benefit of using fermented foods like probiotics to help with the gut microbiome, the immune system overall. And I think what we have to remember is that the drugs work differently from this. So it's not, I don't think we should directly be comparing them. So there's no direct sort of correlation. So you're not going to, I believe, affect the way your drugs are working by doing more of a better sort of nutrition diet through using, for example, fermented foods. Okay. I don't think there is any evidence to show this. There isn't, actually.
Okay, thank you. I think you've answered the next question in your presentation, which was, is there any medical research which shows evidence of the effect of diet on inflammation? So I think the answer is very clearly yes, you've
Yes,
shown
yeah,
that.
there is, but if I may add to that, Elsa, that we do need more robust evidence. There is a big, I've kept a more sort of lay version of my presentation, but when I talk about the science behind what the messages that I've given you, you will see that a lot of the studies that have been conducted to date have a very weak methodologically, because it's a very difficult topic to study. There's so many of what we call unmeasured confounders, so many factors that you cannot account for when you're looking at those relationships. But there is evidence, and it's increasing.
Thank you. A question from Anne Stillman. Best way to lose weight and eat healthier for RA?
So we heard about the Mediterranean diet, lifestyle, sort of exercise when you can within in the individual's abilities. But I think the main message, the main response there should probably be, do what you can stick with. And there is evidence that the Mediterranean diet is also sustainable, so people do tend to stick to it. So I'm all up for sort of, and this is what I tell my patients, if you can adopt the Mediterranean diet and that Mediterranean lifestyle, then that's what I would advise.
Thank you. And of course, I guess if you want to lose weight, you need to do the exercise as well.
Absolutely. And eat less of the sugary stuff, the fatty stuff. So nutrition and exercise in combination are two big factors.
Okay, so next question is an anonymous one. If a food says good for or supports a healthy immune system, should I avoid it as someone taking medication to reduce my immune system?
It's very similar, I think, to the question we heard earlier. I think it's a wrong approach. It's a wrong way to think about things. And I don't think there should be foods that claim that they support a healthy immune system as such. I mean, I think we do need more robust evidence. But what I can tell you is that there's evidence, as I said earlier, that there are foods that support and improve the gut microbiome, which is linked to disease, expression of disease. And that's, I think, where we should be focusing.
Thank you. Is it beneficial to have a vegan diet?
So there's a lot of benefits that have been demonstrated from older studies and more recent studies on the use of plant-based diets and their benefits in terms of longevity, cognition, and sort of less inflammation. There's studies in rheumatoid arthritis, that older studies with methodological limitations that we said earlier, but which do show that there are benefits in reducing flares, tender joints, swollen joints, and so on. So yes, there is evidence, but what I would say there is that we must make sure with these exclusion diets, plant-based diets only, for example, that they are balanced. I think Jyoti mentioned this earlier, that you're not deficient in other important vitamins such as vitamin D, calcium, which come from other sources. So it's best to be done with the support of a dietitian where possible.
Okay, thank you. Let me just see if I can find a question that we can ask of Ailsa and Jyoti. How can you tell, Jyoti, let's ask you this one. How can you tell whether diet is improving RA when you're on biologics and immunosuppressant drugs? Because I know you're on a biologic and have been for some time. Do you feel better in yourself when you know you're eating more healthily?
I think when I've just come off of the biologics at the moment, so I'm just in between the thing. But when I was on the biologics, actually I was very, very good, and my RA was very, very controlled, and I felt that I had the energy to plan better and to eat better. When you're in a lot of pain, you want to, standing in the kitchen and trying to work out what you're going to eat and how the family are going to eat, you want to minimize that because you don't want to put that as extra pressure on your joints. And for me personally, I felt while I was on biologics, I was a lot better, and I was eating healthier because I quite enjoy the cooking part of things and feeding the family. I do really enjoy that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I do feel that on biologics, I was a lot more in control of what I was eating and try to do it better. as much as I could.
Thank you. And Aisha, coming to you, which multivitamins, if any, do you find beneficial that you might take alongside what you do in dietary terms? Having, heard what Elena said about things like curcumin and cinnamon and so on.
Yeah, first of all, sorry if there's any interference. My laptop battery has overheated. I've worked out what that sound is. If you can hear some sound, I think it's been so hot today. So for me, I'm only on one DMARD. I'm on a very low dose. My rheumatoid arthritis has been in a drug-controlled remission for a very long time. So the only supplements or anything that I take is vitamin D3 with K2. So that's the only one. And then I do take an iron supplement. That's because my iron is low. But then apart from that, everything I get is from my nutrition, and my energy levels, for me, touch wood, are better than even, because I changed my diet, are better than even before I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. So I have a better quality of life. So otherwise, no, I don't take a multivitamin. I don't. I do use kefir. Sorry, I said the American way. I use kimchi, I use sauerkraut, food sources, a lot of oily fish as well.
Thank you. So Elena, if certain foods are cut out for a period of time, is there a possibility that you will have problems reintroducing them at a later date, i.e. new intolerances?
I mean, I guess the question is, why would you cut them out? Is it because you had intolerance in the first place, in which case on reintroduction, maybe the same will happen? But if not, then I don't see why you would then develop intolerance. If it's a very difficult question for me to answer, actually, but maybe, and everybody is different, I think is the answer.
Okay. And it's just as a connected question, is there a correlation between rheumatoid and food intolerances, i.e. could an environmental trigger that comes along when you're somebody who's got the genetic link, could that be triggered by a food intolerance, for example, as opposed to another different type of environmental trigger?
Well, I can tell you what we know, which is that the genes, for example, that for rheumatoid arthritis are partly shared, so to say, with, for example, the genes for celiac disease. So there may be a little bit of a predisposition there with gluten as a trigger. But again, what we advise on that, and we've written a big editorial on this with a dietitian from Imperial, is that you should only exclude, for example, gluten if you're got rheumatoid arthritis, for example, if you're known to have a gluten sensitivity or if you have celiac disease. Otherwise, not. And there's other implications of leaving gluten out if you haven't got an indication that you should do that. But there are common genes that might predispose to some of this.
Okay. There's a question here from someone called Sarah, and I've not heard of this before. Any benefit of taking moringa? Does anybody know what moringa is?
So I think, yeah. Shall I go for it? Just, you know,
It's a leaf. It's a like almost like
spirulina.
Yeah, or I was going to say like coriander. It's like that kind of thing, isn't it? I've heard of it. I have tried it, but I didn't really find anything beneficial about it.
And is a question whether it's beneficial, Ailsa?
Yes, any benefit from taking it?
So so this comes this plant-based sort of derivative has a lot of vitamins, B complexes, and sort of other important minerals that are known to be anti-inflammatory and all that. But there is no research, there's no robust research to date to support, like many other nutritional elements, to support the use of this in controlling, for example, disease activity in the context of rheumatoid and other diseases. But potentially, yes, and it might be. I would like to answer this question because I get a lot of this question from my patients. This helps me. Turmeric tea every morning, cinnamon tea really helps me. My joints feel better. Then my answer to that is do it. The evidence is not robust. The studies are not great, but we're seeing maybe some relationship there with improved outcomes. But we need more to convincingly say you know, to formulate this into a recommendation. But if it helps you, do it. If it doesn't, then don't, because this can also be very, very expensive.
I think that's very good advice. I mean, one of the things that I've started doing in the last, I suppose, 2 or 3 months is taking a dessert spoonful of olive oil that's very high in polyphenols. It's a particular type of extra virgin oil. And I honestly believe that I have felt positive benefits from that. So I'm going to carry on taking it. And having seen your presentation tonight, it's clearly one of the good things to take, especially as I'm just literally taking it neat as opposed to frying stuff in it and what have you. So I think there's a lot of benefit if you're eating something that's good for you and you think it's good for you and it's doing you good, carry on.
And I had
sorry, I was just going to say, one of the things that might be important to mention is if you're going to take some kind of supplement, that it's always worth talking to your rheumatologist first and just checking that it's not going to interact with any of your medications. Would that be good advice, Elena?
Absolutely. And I just wanted to say that I had a beautiful slide on olive oil that I can share on another time that I have removed, but it has anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory properties. It's been shown to have an impact on longevity, on cognition. It has such unique properties that I really think it's one of the most powerful food ingredients that we have, and we should all be using it, and ideally in its raw form. I mentioned earlier the way we use the foods, the way we cook them matters. So olive oil, like other oils, have heating points. If you overcook an oil, you will change its good properties, so that those fatty acids, you would change them into the less good fatty acids, and it almost destroys the oil. So it's important to use them and to use them well.
Thank you. A question here from Sean. Can you drink alcohol whilst taking methotrexate? Well, I know the answer to this, but I'll let you answer.
This is a very common question again, and I tell my patients, look, I mean, if it makes you happy to have a glass of wine or something, once every so often, then just do it, because it's very important that we are well in ourselves. And we've seen that there hasn't been a problem with the blood monitoring. As you know, with methotrexate, we do a lot of liver function test monitoring. If there's no issue, then fair enough. In theory, we shouldn't, because it's liver metabolized, the methotrexate, the same with the alcohol, and it could lead to derangement of the liver function. But I'm a bit more relaxed with my patients, because I really want them to be happy and enjoy life and enjoy food. So as long as it's in moderation and within reason, then I say it's fine.
Great, thank you. So one of the things that maybe, I don't know whether Jyoti and Aisha, whether you do anything to help protect your bones, but there's a question here about having RA, of course, makes you more at risk of osteoporosis. And therefore, should we be taking vitamin D and calcium? So we've heard from Aisha that she takes vitamin D. I take vitamin D. Jyoti's nodding. She takes vitamin D.
Yeah, I take D3, which is a combination of calcium and vitamin D.
Right. D3. So what are your thoughts here, Elena?
So vitamin D deficiency is a very common problem in this country. I find a lot in my patients. I measure it, I look out for it, and I replace it when it's low. There's no point replacing it when it's very good, high levels. And when I say good levels, I don't mean just above the thresholds that we have, but a good level for optimal bone, muscle, and joint health. So I measure it, and if it's low, I replace it. If it's not, then I leave it and I watch it, because it's very important for the immune system, for lots and lots of things, osteoporosis, osteopenia, and it's the one that has evidence. If you're low on vitamin D, then there's studies that have shown higher disease activity, more inflammation, more flares potentially, so it's worth replacing.
So there's a question here which I think is a really important one. If diet worked, why doesn't the NHS offer advice to all RA patients? So I see Elena smiling here, and I understand why. I mean, the NHS, to be honest, I don't think in 43 years of living with this disease and interacting with the NHS, I've never seen it in such a bad state. And I know that there are health professionals all over the country who are really concerned and worried that they're not able to offer the kind of help and support to their patients that they would like to because of workforce shortages, because of backlogs of patients waiting to be seen, not enough time in clinic, and so on and so on. So this is one of the reasons why I think a session like this is so important, because it's more evident and important now than ever to me, certainly, that we need to be taking more responsibility and more ownership of our health. And that means that we need to be more proactive in doing things that will improve our outcomes, like eating as healthily as we can, like doing exercise, like making sure that we're taking vitamin D if we're deficient in vitamin D. And then there's other things that might prevent comorbidity, like heart disease. So making sure you get your blood pressure checked regularly, you get your lipids and your cholesterol checked on a regular basis. So I think that it cannot be all down to the health professionals to do this stuff. We know that the GPs aren't doing it because they've got their backs to the wall as well. So I think it's a very challenging time for health professionals and for patients. What do you think, guys? I'll ask all of you. So Ailsa, what about you?
So as very similar, 14 and a half years ago, about that long, when I got my diagnosis, I wasn't advised on nutrition or exercise really, but then in some ways, I was relatively young, around like 39, 30. I felt like I had the internet, and I was able to work out roughly that it's worth exercising, and that's when I put it in. And nutrition took me a bit longer, but it did come over time. So yeah, I don't know how much more. Don't know how much more I can expect from healthcare professionals. I feel like I need to take my health into my hands as well, and I try to do that. So yeah, that was my experience.
JT, what about you? Would you agree with what I've just said?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I do feel that, when you go and see a healthcare professional, with all respect, they don't have the time to talk about everything. They just talk about what's happening with you, what's happening with your medication, how they can help in that way. They don't really talk about nutrition and your diet. They don't talk about your exercise. They don't really discuss things like that. And I think we have to take it in our own hands to see what we need to do, and how we need to strengthen our muscles, basically, to support the joints and things like that. So I do think that it's really important for us to do that ourselves. That's what I've always done.
Coming back to you, what do you think?
I have to apologize because there was a lot of break in the sound, but I think I got the gist of this. What I would say is that this is all part of self-management. The primary responsibility is with the patient, but patients need to be supported in this. We need to support them. We need to signpost. We need to do all of those things. And unfortunately, you're right in that this is not happening well on the NHS. And very few of us, from a clinical point of view, have, I guess, an interest in this. There are time pressures. There's a lot of issues in the clinic that prevent this really important discussion. And this is where the role of dietitian comes in. But again, resources, it's very difficult to find a dietitian and to easily see them on the NHS. So there are real problems. But what I would advise is that the patients to take a more active role in your health, to really look into this, study, ask, investigate, and do what you feel is right for you, and to seek advice from the sources. The patient organization are a fantastic source. Look what NRAS is doing now with this webinar. So they're a fantastic source of information that you can get a lot of benefit from when it comes to self-management.
Thank you. So if anybody hasn't seen our Smile RA e-learning program, you can just go to the website and do /self-management or /smile, and you will find it. It's free to register. We have 7 modules on there, bite-sized information and learning. And one of those modules is a module all on exercise. And we've got 5 little 15-minute taster sessions where we've got experts delivering yoga, Tai Chi, resistance and strengthening exercises and so on, that you can do either as a daily workout alongside, you know, anything else that you might do in exercise terms, or you can do as randomly or ad hoc as you like. So, you know, we are trying to do as much as we can, as Elena says, to support you in the things that you might want to do to improve your lifestyle and your RA. But certainly one of the things that I'm very conscious of is the fact that we have, we're more at risk of cardiovascular disease. And so diet is a big part of the importance of looking after ourselves in that respect and trying to eat healthily. And so we reduce and mitigate those extra risks that we are already experiencing because of having RA. So we are just 2 minutes away from our last, the end of our session. So I would just like to say a huge thank you to Elena, to Ailsa and Jyoti for being with us this evening. Elena, your presentation was great, and this will be live on our YouTube channel and on our NRAS Facebook, so you'll be able to watch it back if you missed it this evening. So don't worry about that. Next month, our NRAS Live is going to be all about oral health. And we've got an amazing professor of oral health from Birmingham University who's going to be talking to us about how what goes on in our mouth can influence our RA. So thank you all very much indeed. Do tune in again at the end of July. And have a good summer, everybody. Let's hope the weather stays nice and hot. So thank you all. Good night.